So welcome to the Teachers Podcast.
Thank you.
We're going to do an interview, and I've got James Holmes with me from MarkMate. So you may be thinking, I recognise this person, and he has been on the Dragon's Den with his product, and I thought it'd be really good to talk to him, not just about his product, but also about marketing. So I just think this is going to be a really interesting interview. I spoke to some of the teachers in the office about the kind of questions that I thought people would really want to know the answers to.
Yeah.
I also put it in our Facebook community as well. So I've got a few questions from them as well.
Okay.
So that's going to be good. So the first thing I thought would be helpful is, so obviously I know you used to be a teacher. Can you just explain your journey, towards teaching and then out of teaching? Because it's just helpful for everyone to have a bit of a background.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been a teacher for probably 8 years. Always wanted to be a teacher, kind of wanted to be a primary school teacher. So I trained as a primary school teacher and originally as a music teacher. I got my first job with a year 1 class and wanted to become a music teacher at school. And then kind of within the first couple of years of teaching, I kind of found a passion for IT and for computing, which kind of led on to some other things. Did sort of CAS master teaching and sort of supporting other schools with it was just when the computing curriculum was coming out, the new computing curriculum. So it was all about supporting schools, leading schools with that new curriculum. And that kind of got me into the world of IT and the world of computers. And then as I kind of started working up through the year groups, so I went from sort of Key Stage 1, then went to Key Stage 2, and then my sort of last job that I was at was at a middle school, so that was Key Stage 2 and Key Stage 3. And that was brilliant because it was basically enabled me to kind of teach computing through most year groups really. And it was kind of in that school, in that last position, where I was kind of starting to feel the kind of stress that everybody kind of gets under in the workload balance, because I'd taken on more responsibility and all those sorts of things. And then that kind of led to developing the product, and MarkMate in itself was purely for a conversation in the staff room. We're having a chat about, surely there's an easier way, what about using dictation, and it kind of just spurred me on from there, and I just went away and started researching and developing for my own personal, product to kind of help myself. And it kind of just went from there really, and snowballed, and other people started seeing it, and other people wanted to use it, and then it kind of led us to where we are today, really.
So that's pretty impressive, really. So you've been a teacher, but then you've also developed something as well, like as a developer.
Yeah, and that's not something I'd ever done before. I had a little bit of programming knowledge, having to teach programming at school and different languages and stuff, but not something I'd, would confess that I was a programmer or anything. But once I sort of started digging into it and could see that there was potential there, I just was driven basically. So it's just every free minute at home after I'd done my school sort of responsibilities and stuff, it was just reading, Googling, testing, doing all kinds of things.
How on earth did you fit that in?
I really struggled. And it was just literally when it was all sort of the main kind of phase was when my wife was pregnant with our first daughter, and it was literally I was coming home from school sort of 6-7 o'clock, do my marking, we'd have tea, and then I'd go and sit at my computer until 3-4 o'clock in the morning, and then sleep for a couple of hours, go to school, and basically that was my life for sort of 4 or 5 months, basically.
Was it worth it though?
Yeah, definitely. And it was that kind of that light bulb moment when I'd been putting all this time and all this effort into it, and then I had the first kind of test run where I had my set of books up in my spare room, and I literally had a little stopwatch and timed it. And did all my marking and sort of stopped the stopwatch, and I realised there's something here. So yeah, it was definitely worth it in that sense.
So you've mentioned a lot about computing. So do you have any thoughts about the computing curriculum?
I love, computers have always been just a personal passion of mine anyway. As I said, I didn't think I was going to be a computing teacher as such. I love technology, and I love how technology can enhance all kinds of things. My personal thing about the computing curriculum is I love the way that it opens the way children think about things, the computational thinking that can be applied to everything, not just computing. there's a lot of things like the barefoot computing sort of materials and things, which is all about computing skills and thought processes, but not even using technology, going outside and doing things out in the playground and stuff like that. And that's what I really enjoyed, trying to bring that into my other subjects.
Yeah.
I think it's a great thing.
No, thank you. So this question is actually from Jack Watson at Classroom Secrets.
Okay.
So I think he did a little bit of research, because he says, in your Dragon's Den episode, you said that you had a 25% ceiling that you give away for investment.
Yeah.
But you actually took 35% that would drop to 30.
Yeah.
After the repayment, and he wants to know, how did you feel about it, and was it worth it?
Yeah. I've always been that guy that sits on the sofa and watches Dragon's Den and just like screams at the telly going like, don't do it. You know, people going in for 10% and then they walk away with 60% or something like that, you know? Yeah. And, you know, I went in originally asking for 5% for quite a small equity, and I had the ceiling of 25% in my head. But it's so hard to explain the feeling that you have when you're in that position and you're there and you've got these, you know, potentially life-changing people in front of you for something that I've honestly put my blood, sweat and tears into, to think, actually, is it worth selling a little bit more of my soul and actually giving them that?
Soul, not company, soul.
Yeah. To kind of see if it would help. And I came out of it afterwards, like literally after sort of coming out of the studio, and it was the weirdest feeling. It was just like a mix of pure excitement and also pure fear of what have I just done. And it was definitely worth it. The kind of twist in the story is that the investment didn't go through. So I haven't actually got a dragon on board. We parted on very good terms, and actually it was my decision to stop the progress of the investment. Because I felt like the response that happened after the show and the feedback we've been getting from users and things didn't warrant the extra support that I could see. Do you know what I mean? So at the time it was definitely worth it, and I'm glad I did. Had it gone through, I might have probably given you a different answer. Yeah,
and this is a selfish question from my point of view that sort of just come to me now. But from a business point of view, do you feel like it's opened you up into that world of mentors and business people? And
yeah, hugely. I mean, you know, we're working alongside some really quite big companies, like you know, stationery companies and things that are. For no gain of their own, are helping us and kind of mentoring the company in that sense, and that's all because of, you know, we've got a bit of exposure now, and people realise what the product is. You know, that was the big thing that was lacking before. It was a new concept, a new idea, and people hadn't heard of it. Whereas now, if we make a phone call to a company or to a school or something like that, we've got a bit more. Awareness. I see what you mean. It can be really hard selling to schools when nobody knows who you are. Yeah, a perfect example is I did a little like a little trade show, and when I first got this sort of developed, and my head teacher kind of released me for the day to let me go and just get some feedback and stuff. I wasn't trying to sell it. I just wanted to engage with teachers and see what they thought. And I was literally having to kind of jump out in front of them and stop them and say, like, can I show you this? I'm not trying to sell you anything. I'm trying to, I just want to get your feedback. I want to know what you think. And I was actually physically having to stop them because they just thought it was some kind of, assessment tracker or something like that. There's hundreds of them out there. And it was hard breaking that barrier. So that's how. Yeah, you don't know what you don't know. And sometimes you need to find out. You need someone jumping in front of you.
This is it, hello! And okay, so you've set the company MarkMate up yourself, and you've developed this product. So for someone sat there, because, when we had the conversation before, even I was a little bit confused. Like, how does it even work? Talk me through marking books with it.
Yeah, absolutely. So the prime sort of concept of it, and it, I always say to people, this came out of my classroom. So I developed this personally within my own practice, and the whole idea of it is it's not something that's meant to completely change the way you as a teacher teach or work or mark or assess or anything like that.
Yeah.
The whole idea of it is it's something that enhances your current ways of teaching.
Yeah.
The whole sort of package is basically a label printer and an online application that kind of feeds to that label printer. So what it enables you to do is mark your books in your normal way, or your sort of worksheets or whatever in your normal way. So using your school's policies, go through, annotating, highlighting, reading that student's work. But as you're going through that book, you're kind of verbally narrating everything you kind of go through. So, as you're going, I really like the way you've used this word in this sentence, or, well done for getting that bit of punctuation in this paragraph, etc. Yeah. And as you're talking, MarkMate's turning that into text through dictation and recording it all, so that when you get to the end of that piece of work, you can just say print label, and instantly a label will come out for you to stick into that piece of work and then move on. So instead of having to get through, annotate, and then write your feedback that you've kind of formulated in your head as you've gone through, it's doing it for you as you go.
Yeah.
But not only then can you stick it in, the feedback in, but you can also grade that student using your school's assessment strategies within MarkMate, again with your voice. So when you're actually marking, you don't need to touch the computer at all, it's just listening all the time. So you can get to the end of the piece of work and say, grade 9 or working towards or whatever your school uses, and it will record that assessment on an assessment tracker as well.
Wow.
So then you stick that in, move on to the next book. So the idea is there are systems out there where you can scan a piece of work and let it mark it for you or highlight things for you and things like that. I didn't want it to be that. I didn't want it to be something that drastically changes a teacher's
system.
System. Because we've all been there where you kind of get into a way of doing something, and then your head teacher will say, right, we need to do it this way now, and then it's like you've got to upheave everything and change your own practice.
Yeah, I guess as well for me, sort of listening to you say that, I suppose maybe the feedback would be more detailed, because if I saw, I really like the way that you've added this word in or something, I'd probably try and shorten it as much as possible and do a tick and say great word or something. But I guess you're writing sentences with your voice. Yeah,
and that's when I was originally kind of developing, and we did lots of. My school was very supportive, so we did like whole school surveys of the students and before and after and all the staff and everything. And one of the biggest things that we got back from the students is that they felt like their teacher was talking to them when they were reading it, because it was almost conversational. And I was exactly the same when I was marking books. Marking was a big thing for me, and it was very much like I knew what I wanted to say, but I would condense it as much as possible just so it's on that bit of paper because of time. And that's the thing, it's more verbal feedback that you're given.
Yeah, like verbal but written down.
Yeah.
So you've mentioned then that, what am I going to say? You've mentioned that you can have an assessment, but can you track everything you've written for each student?
Yeah.
Is that like saved?
In
a place so you can see what feedback they've already had?
Yeah. So what we've tried to do is create the sort of same system you'd normally have, your pile of books, and then there was a teacher at my school who would have a paper mark book next to her while she's marking. She'd give her feedback, and then she'd give her a sort of grading system, 1, 2 or 3, based on that learning objective. And what we've got is kind of an online version of that that's done automatically as you're marking and giving your feedback. So your grade is saved, but also your feedback is saved.
Wow.
And another sort of great point of that is when you come to like parents' evening, book looks, report writing, those sorts of end of unit times when normally you have all your books out and you're having to go through and kind of collect targets and stuff. You can literally just log in, see your student, and see every bit of feedback you've given over the last however long you've been using it.
That's amazing. Right, so I want to talk to you about marking policies. So I know we talked about this before, but I feel like it's a really good time to talk about it because a lot of schools are changing theirs. So, a couple of questions. Do you advise on marking policies? You've already said they don't need to change it to use MarkMate, but do you have ones that you think, this one kind of really works well with MarkMate? What are your preferences?
We don't necessarily advise schools on marking policies and kind of go into a school that's sort of come to us and asked to have a look at it, going in saying you need to make this change. It won't work unless you do this with your marking policy, because A, that's unrealistic, but also B, schools work in different ways, and you know, like I said before, you don't want to upheave everything and change everyone's systems. But one personal sort of bugbear, this is not the company or anything product related, but just personal thing from when I was a teacher, was just the frustration of schools and sort of higher level bodies to allow change in policies and things if there's something that actually has a positive impact. You know, not even just with this, just not even with marking, but just generally.
I do think that's coming more. I mean, if you look at you know, teachers talking, especially in the Facebook groups, that is happening more, which is why I thought it'd be really good to talk about.
It seems like more trust, and I hope this is the right thing to say, but it seems like more trust is being given to the classroom teacher. Whereas when I was teaching, which wasn't that long ago, nothing, you know, particular about the school I was working at, but there was that overwhelming sense of, I don't want to try something different, almost because
I won't be allowed.
It's not going to fit in with our picture of the classroom or the school.
I think it depends how the school approach it as well. So I actually interviewed Mitch Hudson a couple of weeks back, and he talked about his marking policy at his school, because he's a deputy head, and they actually worked together on it. And he made some suggestions, and he said, what they wanted to do was they wanted to write I for independent or something like that, and he was like, oh, you'll regret that, but I'll let you do it, I'll let you try it. And I think it's about working together, isn't it? What works for that school, what works for all the teachers, what works for the children, and trying it, and then saying, do you know what, that didn't work as well, and being open to change.
But that's general evolution of anything, you know, of schools, of any kind of job. You've got to be willing to listen to everyone on the ground floor and say, you know, what do you think is going to have an impact on your...
They're doing it. They're doing it.
And, you know, one of the best sort of policies I've seen being in schools and things is having that freedom as a teacher, where you've got sort of 5, 6, 7 different approaches to marking, you know, through pupil assessment feedback, or, you know, deep marking or symbol marking and things like that. And they were encouraged to choose whatever kind of style of marking would fit that piece of work and would have the most impact. So if you were doing a piece of writing and you actually wanted the student to, in the next lesson, be more have more freedom to kind of edit and not necessarily just make changes, but think more about it, they just use a symbol system. Whereas if you wanted them to actually really formally look at a specific, you know, thing that they've used in their piece of work, they'd use more of a deep marking, where they'd actually leave feedback, and they'd have 2 different colours for their feedback and things. So I think we don't advise on policies, but one big thing I always say whenever I go into schools is, if you can see that something has a value, so if MarkMate has a value to you as a teacher and as a school, or if, you know, different whiteboards that you use at school have an impact to as a teacher, why not make changes? You know, why continue to do things and just struggle along? And that's just my personal kind of ethos, really. Yeah,
that's good. And I suppose that marking policy that you mentioned is kind of like taking the best of everything. I suppose there is an argument that they might get confused with that. What years groups did that encompass, that school?
So that was another middle school, so that was years 5 to year 9.
So I guess at that age as well, you know, it's not as confusing, is it?
No.
Whereas further down the school.
And it took a lot of implementing for the students as well. So for the students to know, you know, if I've got these symbols, that means I need to do this, or if I've got, you know, this code, or this has been underlined in this colour or something like that, I need to do that. But I do think that had a positive impact, because it made the children more kind of independent in their learning, because they were actively engaged with their marking as opposed to just doing what they've been told to do, you know?
Yeah, thank you. Right, so while we're talking about marking policies, there's been a lot of talk recently, hasn't there, about changing marking policies, schools re-looking at it, you know, should they mark at all, do they scrap it, do they do verbal feedback, do they mark much less? You know, what do you think the value of marking is?
I mean, I can only talk from my personal experience. You know, I don't want to come across as this kind of person that kind of should dictate how marking should be done and all that sort of stuff, because, you know, who am I to say that? But I can talk from my personal experience of when I was in my classroom. And I'm hearing a lot at the moment from schools about schools going down the no marking policies. And I think on the surface of it, it's a fantastic approach, and for the whole work-life balance and teacher retention and things, it's a real positive step that people are listening. But for me, there was always huge value in the marking I was doing because of the way I delivered it, I think, and because the way I allowed the students to respond to that marking. You know, I was always in that kind of rut of just going through, tick and flick, leave a little sentence, look at paragraph 2, edit that, or whatever, you know. The moment I started kind of being more conversational and more detailed, more specific, is the moment I kind of saw that classroom change, and I saw the students not only, you know, coming up with better end products because we were putting more kind of thought into their work, but there was more pride from the students because they felt like I was spending more time with them as an individual and their piece of work, as opposed to, you know, marking their work, sticking it in a drawer.
Conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, the pride that they then had in that piece of work, because they knew someone was going to read it and they knew someone was going to react to it. And for me, the most important part of the marking is not necessarily what you're putting down on that piece of paper, but it's the time you give the student afterwards to reflect on what you're saying. And, you know, that's something I built into our lessons was the first 5 to 10 minutes of the lesson was sit quietly, look through yesterday's work, look at what I've said, you know, ask questions if you need to, talk to your partners, talk to your tables, what do you think that means, why do you think I've said that? And it creates more engagement in that work and makes it feel more valued. So my worry with having a no marking policy is how a teacher is going to have that same level of impact on that individual student, on that individual piece of work, whatever it might be, on top of what they're already doing. Because, you know, teachers give verbal feedback all the time, you know, that's just what you do in the classroom. You go around, you're always looking over shoulders and enhancing things and suggesting stuff. So how are you going to do that as well as the extra stuff? That's something I'm interested to see how it evolves and how it develops.
And I guess really, I think, you know, what we've talked about so far, we're saying that MarkMate is probably really good for recording verbal feedback. You know, why are you so passionate about that approach, like verbal feedback written down?
Because for me, it's the verbal feedback is something that, you know, I talk a lot, and when I was in the classroom and things, conversation was like the biggest tool. You know, I would never say to a student, you need to do that, or you need to change this. It was more, what do you think about that, or what could you do to that, to kind of lead them on and have that conversation, because then they feel more empowered about that piece of work. And that's something I think MarkMate allows you to do, because you're having that almost kind of conversation. Yes, it's with the piece of work that you're looking at, but that student then feels gratified the next day when they're having that. The having it written down and stuck in that book is a time-saving thing, because otherwise you're having to go around to each individual student and give that feedback. Or, you know, I trialed when I was developing this system a way of, you know, I tried all different kinds of way of giving feedback. And one of the ways was at the beginning of the lesson, we would have 10 minutes independent task up on the board. I would sit at my desk and a student would bring their book up to me and I would physically say to them, this is what, you know, I've made notes, this is what you need to work on, go away now and use this time to do that. And that was hugely time constrained, like time had such an impact on time. And, you know, then you always have students that are just not really doing what you've asked them to do. And it's just a way, it's not efficient. So it helps with that because everyone can just focus and look at their piece of work, but also without kind of getting into kind of, you know, teacher mode, it's that evidence as well. You know, you can look back through, anyone can pick that book up, be it, you know, supply teacher, TA, LSA, whatever, can pick that book up and see exactly what's happened in the last week or the last month or anything like that. And that's something that if you're going away from written feedback, how is that going to be passed on to other adults? I'm not saying like Ofsted coming in and doing book looks, all that sort of stuff. That's not what I mean. I mean more like, you know, if you have that time when you're off for a couple of days or you're on a training course or anything like that, you don't want to go in and repeat the things that someone's been saying for the last week or... Do you know what I mean? So
although you have to sort of think then, if there was a supply teacher in, because obviously I've done a lot of supply.
Me too.
Would I would I flick back through and see the kind of feedback?
Yeah.
Probably not, because at the end of the day, if I'm doing day-to-day, but I suppose, obviously, if you're doing a job share, then you might. So there's definitely sort of arguments for both.
Yeah.
So I've got a question from Benji. So he's quite a valued member of our community. So he always helps us out and has a lot to say. So he says that schools are in crisis with the budgets right now. And do you really think this is something that schools can afford? Is it a good investment for their money?
I've worked in schools. I've been involved with, budgets for my department and all those sorts of things. And I wholeheartedly understand, how tight budgets are for schools. And like I sort of said at the beginning, originally this wasn't developed to be something I was going to be selling. This was just developed for a tool for myself. And I spent a lot of time kind of trying to think about, price points and cost analysis and all that sort of stuff. And the thing that really kind of crept up when I was getting feedback from all our sort of trial users right at the very beginning was, what value do you put on this now that you've used it? What impact has it actually had on your work-life balance? And when we were getting that feedback back from users, it made me realise that actually, X amount a month or X amount a year or anything, when you actually dig down to the time it can save you, it has that value there. It comes down to the cost of a coffee a week or something like that. If you use it and engage with it, you can save that time and also get that feeling of, relief a little bit from the general strains that we're all under. And that's what I say to schools, is that there's a huge emphasis at the moment on teacher retention, on work-life balance and all this sort of well-being, which should have been there from day one. It's not a new concept. It's just people are now starting to listen, I think, a bit more and realize,
talk about it.
Yeah, and realize the importance of it. And that's something we say to schools. We encourage schools to trial it. Take it on for a couple of weeks, give it to a teacher, and let them see, does it have an impact? Yeah. Because 9 times out of 10 when we do that, schools then realise there is value there for the time that it enables teachers to save. So, budgets are incredibly tight. But for me, it comes down to, what is the school prioritising their budgets around?
Yeah. I see what you mean, yeah. So one question I wanted to ask you was from a business point of view. So we're both ex-teachers, we've both set up businesses. What skills do you think that you learned in teaching that you kind of transferred across into your business, which is a completely different world, isn't it?
Yeah, hugely different. Like the ability to work crazy hours and just keep going with coffee alone helps.
Yeah, I still do that.
I'm so grateful that I got into teaching, like for so many different reasons. And I am genuinely passionate about education. I just love the concept of it. And I've taken so much away from that in, even down to the way that, you meet new people and you talk to new people and all that sort of stuff. It's all about engagement and things. But as far as the business is concerned, it's really helped with, being able to set targets and being able to plan. And I know we spoke about it before, but whenever I was planning a lesson, you'd always look at the end goal. What do you want the student to achieve? And you'd work backwards. You'd plan the week out backwards. To get to there, I need to do this. To get to that, I need to do that. And start from the very beginning. Yeah. And for me, that's exactly how the first phase of MarkMate came about. I literally had a big bit of paper and just started mind mapping. This is what I want to achieve. This is what needs to happen for that to happen. Yeah. What do I need to do that? Let's go, and then I just go away and do a bit of research or do a bit of, reading and things. And that helps from a business point of view because, for my I've got daily goals, weekly goals, 6 monthly goals for the business, for the company.
Daily goals, wow.
Yeah. Turn the computer on and remember to turn it off when you leave. Yeah. But, and that's really helped me stay focused and, being able to still talk with teachers as well is such a massive thing, and being able to understand the industry a little bit. I don't ever try to confess that I know more than anyone, because I don't. I've just come out of a classroom and this is something I'm trying to develop myself. But it's really nice to be able to have that conversation. And when someone starts talking to you about, oh, how could we use this in a different way and, you know, for other purposes, you can spark that conversation up. And that really helps from a business point of view, because they don't feel like it's some salesman coming in and having a chat, you know?
This is it, and it was mentioned on the Facebook Live, wasn't it? It's
Yeah.
nice to see somebody who's actually a teacher doing it, because you're coming from a point of understanding,
Yeah.
and that's always a really good place to start.
Yeah.
So your product uses voice technology.
Yep.
What do you see in the future of voice technology? Because it's the big thing coming that people don't really realise.
Yeah. I've done a lot of, you know, research and reading into sort of voice technology and AR, sort of augmented reality technology. And for me, voice recognition is just something that's, you know, it's becoming more and more part of our daily lives. You know, you've got smart hubs at home that you can talk to, and you can ask for it to order you a taxi or whatever, you know, you don't have to think anymore, you just say it. And, you know, personally, I'm guilty of that. If somebody asks me a question and I'm not quite sure the answer, I'll just ask my little box I've got sat in the corner.
Yeah.
And I think that's fantastic. And I think, you know, the more and more users use it, the better the technology is going to get, because, you know, that's the way the system is created now.
It's learning, isn't it,
Yeah.
all the time?
It's learning from everyone. So everyone that uses it teaches it, basically.
Yeah.
So of course it's going to get better. I personally don't think that voice technology is going to have such a big impact on society as potentially originally thought. It's like everyone kind of thought that, you know, when Google Glass came out, everyone's going to be going around with smart goggles and all this sort of stuff, and that's going to be the future.
I have no idea what Google Glass is.
Exactly. But this is the thing. When it was coming out, you know, this is my computing kind of head coming back on. But what I do think it's good for is enhancing tasks that we already do day to day. Do you know what I mean? Like the whole smart home, smart hub thing.
Putting on Alexa.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, being able to ask what the weather is and all those sorts of little things like that is fantastic. There needs to be more trust from users in voice technology, I think, before we have that big boom where everything is now voice controlled and all that sort of stuff, because it's got a bad press. You know, 5-6 years ago, even more recent than that, voice recognition wasn't that great. You know, it made a lot of mistakes, and it's only recently that Google and other companies have started doing this kind of learning process that the accuracy's just jumped, you know.
So how accurate is it?
Wholeheartedly, it's very accurate. Google, we use Google as our sort of back end, and Google they claim that it has around 94% accuracy, which the human ear apparently has 92% accuracy. So in theory, it's more accurate than the human ear. Is that true? In real life, probably not. You know, I'm not going to sit here and say it never makes a mistake, because...
So how often do you find... I mean, does it depend on your accent? I've got a terrible accent, so... Accents really aren't an issue at all. You know, we work with lots of schools where they have a really mixed range of accents and dialects and all kinds of things. And accents really aren't an issue, you know. As I said, it's learning every day. People are talking to it from all different countries and different languages and things. The main thing that has the biggest impact is having a good microphone. Right.
You know, more often than not, a user will come to us and say, oh, it's made a couple of mistakes here or something like this. And when we actually sort of dig deep, why has it done that? It comes down to the fact they've used their old laptop that's got a tiny little microphone built into it, and they're in a classroom which sort of echoes in the background. It's the same way that if we're having a conversation now, you understand what I'm saying because it's quiet and you're focused on what I'm saying. Whereas for dictation, you've got to provide it that sort of isolated sound for it to get the best understanding. So it is genuinely very accurate. I mean, if you're using it and you're dictating with, you know, it's a skill dictation. It's something you learn. The more and more you use it, the more and more it sort of, you get used to the system. And you know, majority of our users now that have been using it for, you know, a couple of months or so, got it into their sort of day-to-day routine, could mark a set of books and maybe have to change one or two things. I mean, when I used to use it in my classroom, I used to be able to get through a whole set of books and not have to edit anything at all. And even if you do, it's not an extra thing. It's not like a time-consuming thing. The feedback's there on your screen. You know, I used to just give my feedback as I was going through a mark, and I just quickly glance at the screen, okay, print label, and then send the print. You know, it's 10 seconds, little skim read just to check everything. So yeah, until I think people can wholeheartedly trust that everything you say into a voice recognition is going to be
okay.
I don't think there's going to be that big boom in this AI technology that everyone's thinking about.
So if somebody's using MarkMate and they've gone through the process of learning to dictate and learning to use the system most effectively, do you think that it makes marking quicker?
Yes. And this isn't me trying to be, a salesman and trying to sort of say, yes, it definitely does. I wouldn't be here doing this if I didn't honestly know that it makes marking quicker. Like I said at the very beginning, this was developed for me, for my classroom. That was all I was planning on doing with it, And when I had that kind of light bulb moment, when I did mark my first set of books, and a set of English books normally would have taken me 2-3 hours. And even my feedback I was giving then would have been not great quality, if I'm being honest with myself. And then when I marked it, it was like 41 minutes, I think. And I got through a whole set of books and I'd given proper good feedback. I took the books into SLT the next day and was just like, can you have a look at this? What do you think? Trying to get feedback. And it was just that light bulb moment. And it really does speed the process up. And when you get to the end of that set of books, you haven't got that exhaustion where you're like, all I want to do now is get the wine out and just and sit and watch telly for
every night.
And it really does, but you've got to, it's like anything. People expect things to work instantly outside of the box. There is a little bit of, getting used to the system and the way it works, and you do have to change a little bit of your practice. But if you embrace that and you engage with it, it really can save you that time.
You just have to sort of make that extra effort.
Yeah.
So I think, one of the things that sort of jumped out to me is that the feedback is quite detailed, but then I guess it's quite lengthy. So how does that fit in with Key Stage 1? I mean, do you ever have any Key Stage 1 teachers use it, or is it not something that's really applicable for them?
Yeah, one of the things that came up on the Facebook Live was about the whole modelling of the writing process and things. And I've taught Key Stage 1. I understand the importance of constantly, large letters as you're writing, and making sure you're always standing so they can see you write, and that's an incredibly important skill, an important thing. But because you're sort of going through and you're still editing that and you're still modelling that in your classroom practice, that one sentence or two sentences and things like that it doesn't necessarily have that great an impact or reduction of what you're doing in the classroom by having a label that's stuck into that piece of work. But what it does do is allow you to give nice, clear feedback. We've got Key Stage 1 friendly fonts and cursive fonts and all that sort of stuff. So you can still kind of fit it in with the handwriting in a sense. But it's very clear for a Key Stage 1 student, if they're looking at their piece of work, there's the label, that's my feedback, and whether they read it or someone's reading it to them or whatever. We have a lot of Key Stage 1 users, and majority of them use it in a slightly different way, not necessarily for feedback, but they'll print off success criterias, or if they've got a group of hires and they want like a little mini extension task, they'll print 5 or 10 labels off, hand them out, and use it for that. There's ways of adapting it to fit in with your setting and your practice.
One of the things with our resources for maths is we actually make them so they will fit on labels, and some teachers will snip them and then put them on a label printer. So I understand that. Do you think there's scope for using this technology then for report writing?
Loads of people ask me that. It's one of the, when I first started developing this, our school, my school at the time was like, we should get this involved with report writing and things. Dictation isn't a new thing, and this is a question that comes up a lot when I'm talking to schools. Dictation isn't new. The idea of dictating things is not a new concept. What is new is using it in a different way, and using it for a task that you wouldn't normally think about using it. That's why I sort of researched so much about the marking thing, because I hadn't seen that before. And, dictation itself can be used in report writing. I used to use it before this even happened. I used to use dictation when I was writing reports, because handwriting for me has never been a strength. If SLT were looking through my books, it was a question of, is that my writing or is it the student's writing? It's like that. So I used to use dictation a lot. And I think it's really got a place for report writing. That's such an arduous task. I used to hate doing my summer reports. And my last school, originally when I started, we used to have to handwrite them. And if you make a mistake, you'd have to start all over again. And it was hugely time consuming. Yeah, it changed quite quickly, let's put it that way.
I'm sure it did.
But it absolutely can do, and something we are looking at in sort of next phase of product development is having that feedback that you're giving to students on the ground floor, if you will, feeding into a system that will allow you to kind of almost generate a report for a student, but not using comment banks and things based on their levels, but actually using the feedback that you've given them and sort of taking out elements of that feedback to create targets. So, instead of having to look through the books and come up with a target for that student for the next term, we'll be able to log in and say, right, for the last term, you've mentioned this area in their writing so many times, that should probably be their target. Yeah. There's huge scope for all this data that's coming in from AI, yeah. Yeah, basically, and all this data that everyone's constantly feeding into stuff and actually using it as opposed to just looking at it and then at the end of a term getting your averages and things.
Yeah. I like that. That's really good.
Cheers.
So you've obviously talked about the fact that schools might need to make a few tweaks to the marking policies in order to make it work, but they don't really need to sort of en masse change anything. But is there anything that you specifically do to make the software fit in with other marking policies?
We have added, and we're constantly adding more. We're trying to add more and more functionality from getting feedback from users to the point where we had one user say, I've bought it for myself, school are really interested, etc. I want to roll it out to our department. Problem is we have to use a cursive font. And if that is the reason you're not going to buy a system that you think actually has an impact in your work-life balance and your school and everything, is because it can't have the font that you're used to, then that's something we need to change. And instantly, the moment we had that email, the next day our developers were putting in some extra fonts. Because we realised actually some schools do see that as a priority.
Yes, yeah.
And another thing is a lot of schools will require two bits of feedback. So that, what went well and what to do next, or your now task, or whatever like that, or 2 stars and a wish and things like that. So we're working on at the moment having that functionality so you can create almost like a template for your label yourself. So you can have multiple boxes with a little subheading, what went well, next steps and all that sort of stuff. And as you're dictating it, it will put it into those sections for you. So there's nothing I would say necessarily that schools need to change as such. And if anything, it's the other way around. We're trying to adapt.
They need to talk to you, basically.
Yeah, absolutely.
They work with you and tell you what they need.
And the biggest thing that is getting over that initial hurdle of actually showing the teachers and the SLT the impact that it can have on that individual teacher. And once you see that and see the other ways it can be used and used just in your general day-to-day teaching, at that point, that's when the conversation starts happening. Right, how can we fit it in with your marking policy or your assessment strategy or anything like that? Or if it's something you do see a value in, what do we need to maybe tweak a little bit or just take out or put in or something like that, we do work alongside a lot of schools and try and it always starts with a conversation around the table.
Yeah.
This is what it can do. This is the time your teachers have told us it can save. What do we need to do? How are we going to, and we're as a company very open to going into schools and having that kind of discussion and doing it more as a CPD thing more than a...
Yeah, and I guess the more feedback you get and the more options you have, the more schools it's going to help because there'll be crossover, won't they? And they'll be able to make it fit for all the different elements of functionality that you've got that's applicable to them.
And originally it was developed for primary schools, so something I hadn't even thought about was that for GCSE assessments and marking and things, potentially for one piece of work, you might be assessing 3-4 different criteria. Whereas for primary, it was very much like, this is your learning objective, this is what I'm assessing. And, instantly, that was the first thing we started working on because we got feedback from secondary schools saying, well, we do it this way. So within the next week, there was an update that came out and that allowed you to do that. And we need that feedback to grow as a product, Yeah,
thank you. I can hear it's lunchtime. Okay, so I'm just going to change track a little bit. Would you ever go back into teaching?
Yeah, I would. Like I've said before, I really do love teaching, and I love education. I love, I've always wanted to be a teacher. Whether that's a good thing or not, I don't know. But I would. The problem is like it's probably the same that everyone says that's been in teaching. You love teaching for being in the classroom and for working with those students and having that impact, however big or however small. What I don't love is all the other stuff that goes along with it that you have to do. And it's, I understand that's...
The working till 10 o'clock at night.
Yeah, and there was a real turning point was when my daughter was born, and I was spending more time on other people's children than I was on my first child. And there was a big switch in my head that was like, this isn't right. And it's not that I don't want to be spending time on other people's children, that's why I'm there, but I was...
Who's going to spend time with your child?
Well, yeah, and, I can't get that time back,
No.
And that was a big turning point, and I would go back into teaching, but if there was more of a emphasis on the teacher, one of my worst things I used to hate was being told to do something one way when there's a better way of doing something. And I'm not trying to be big-headed and say like, oh, there's different, but when you're just stuck in a rut of systems and filling out this form because you've got to tick this box on that form and then you've got to put it on that system. When you know that there's
Duplicate it.
Constantly going over yourself just to cover your back. And I didn't like that. I almost felt like, every time SLT would pop into my room, I felt like I had to be on guard, and that wasn't an atmosphere I wanted to be in. And it wasn't anything about the school specifically. It was just that's where it had gone at that time.
Yeah, and that's how you felt.
Yeah.
Okay, so you've talked a lot about life-work balance, and as a company, that is something that we're quite passionate about. We've got a campaign going on, and we have life-work balance. We have at the beginning. Yeah. If you could wave a magic wand, how would you solve it?
That's a big question.
Yeah. I'd like to know everyone's point of view.
I would personally give more trust and more belief in the people in the classroom, in the teachers, in the TAs, in the LSAs, in the students, to know that they're there because they want to make that change. And if they think doing something in one way is having an impact, let them do it. If they don't think their marking at that strategy is having an impact, but they can do it in a different way, let them do it. And at that point, that teacher then becomes in charge of their work-life balance. They become in charge of what they think is a priority. That's a hard thing to do because it's not always going to work, and you need consistency necessarily in schools, and that's why you have policies and systems in place and things. But that's just a massive thing I think is lacking, is that you're always having to cover your back because somebody else is going to hold you to account. And that's what builds up this work-life balance. And for me personally, that was what I almost left teaching a couple of years before this started.
Really?
Yeah, I was at the doctor's going for potential going to go off work with stress. I've never had that before, Yeah. And that's all because I was constantly someone over my shoulder all the time.
Yeah, and it's also the amount of working, I think.
That
was it for me.
I wish there was some obvious blinding thing that's just like, if you did this, everything's fine. Unfortunately, I don't think that's the case. I don't know. I honestly don't know how I would make the change. But for me, the big thing is just give more ownership to the people on the ground floor. Yeah, and I'm not talking heads or deputy heads. I'm talking just the ethos of schools. Just give more. Back in the day, 50, 60 years ago, your whole village knew the primary school teacher because they were the ones that knew what they were doing, and they did what they thought was best. Whereas now that doesn't seem to be.
In Somerset. My brother-in-law's from Somerset, so I know all about it.
Yeah, that's the reason we knew everyone in the village, because they also ran the shop on the weekends. And
Right, okay, quick fire questions now. Who was your favourite teacher and why?
Primary school teacher, guy called Mr. Witt. I had him when I was at primary school from probably year 2 up to year 6, kind of like followed us through. He was just a really nice, genuine, down-to-earth guy. And he took the time for us as kids, as individuals. And to this day, at Christmas occasionally, we'll go and meet up for a drink. We'll go and meet up for a beer. We've stayed in touch. Yeah. And it's amazing. And he had such an impact on every single person in that class. And I don't think he realises that.
No.
You know.
Well, hopefully you will now.
I hope so. Yeah.
Are you listening, Mr. Witt?
Big shout out. Yeah.
What do you wish you'd known when you first started out in teaching?
That not to put so much pressure on myself. To know that actually it will be all right. When I first started, it was like so overwhelming. I was kind of like, what have I done? You know, can I do this? Am I really cut out to be a teacher? You know,
Yeah.
I could do the standing up in front of the kids bit and presenting stuff, but could I really keep up with all the other things? And that was the biggest probably message I'd say to myself, is actually just give yourself a break and, you know, go for it.
Believe that you could do it.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So what are the 3 biggest changes you've seen during your time in education so far?
So the biggest thing for me, because I was involved most with it, was the computing curriculum, you know, that coming in and becoming more of an emphasis. Although that seems to have kind of, from my experience from last year, you know, as I was leaving school and stuff, it kind of almost feels like perhaps that emphasis has gone a little bit.
On the back burner.
Yeah.
Grammar's up there instead.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, that's just what happens. You know, every 6 weeks something new is kind of rotating around and becoming the emphasis, and that's the thing. So that for me was a big change, and I think the big impact for the last schools I was working at was, you know, the data became such a big prominent feature of my career anyway. Everything was data driven, and everything had to be, and I'm not saying that's all schools, because I've worked in a school before where they were complete opposite, and it was, you know, as long as the kids are smiling, let's carry on, you know.
Yeah.
But that for me is one of the biggest changes that's impacted me, is the fact that, you know, it's almost like people come in and don't see the kids anymore. They see the numbers and they see the data, they see the statistics, and that's it's a personal bugbear. Yeah.
So where do you think education needs to go in the next 10 years?
I would love education to become more kind of creative, more about the school, the classroom, the child, and more open to expression and interpretation a little bit. You know, we all know as teachers, you've got end goals, you've got objectives, you've got things that we need to make sure the kids are hitting, and you know, that's what teaching is. But how you get to that point should be more ownership on that teacher, more freedom and things. And you know, if you spend a week engaging the kids and going outside and doing loads of forest schooly stuff in primary schools, I mean, that's an amazing initiative. But you get to that same end goal, then that's amazing.
And maybe in a memorable way as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm talking completely from personal experience. You know, that's I think why I love education so much, is because I had that impact. As in, my teacher had that impact on me. And that's what I would love education to be, is more of like the children want to go to school because they want to have their teacher and their teachers around them, you know, exciting them and pushing them and kind of, you know, challenging them and all that sort of stuff. Which I know, you know, as teachers, that's what everyone wants.
Yeah, and I think it's definitely what teachers try to do.
But
sometimes they're a bit constrained.
Yeah, exactly. And I think until there's that kind of understanding broadly that that's a good thing to be doing, you know, looking like Steiner schools and that kind of approach and all that sort of stuff. That's where I'd love it to be in 10 years' time. It's quite a colourful picture, I suppose.
Last one then. So what did you want to be when you grew up?
I've answered that probably 100 times. A fireman. No, I wanted to be a teacher. I always wanted to be a teacher. Literally to the point where, you know, when you leave school at the end of like year 6 or leave primary school, you know, we got given a Bible. It was a Church of England school. We got given a Bible. It was signed by everyone. And my teacher, Mr. Witt, wrote, "See you in the staff room." And I've still got that, you know, there's a little momentum of kind of thing of like, you know.
And you did?
Yeah, basically, yeah. And the pub.
And the pub.
Yeah, that's it. But yeah, no, I've always wanted to be a teacher. I went through a little phase of wanting to get into music and things, and luckily that kind of came into my teaching as well, so best of both worlds.
Well, thank you so much for doing this interview.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for having me.
I found it really, really interesting, and I'm sure the listeners will. I think it's just nice that we can talk about marking for a change. I'm sure that you probably don't want to talk about it right now, but maybe they'll listen in September, if not now.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
You're more than welcome. Thank you for having me.